is a very, very large topic. I've done versions of this in my life before, and I can tell you when I was devising this new set of slides and thinking about this talk, I had many different pathways that I could go down to really talk about the withdrawal strategy in retirement. It's probably the most important and most asked about issue when I have prospective clients come into my office, and even existing clients. They want to know about how to take their nest egg, convert it into income, and live off of it. And it's a new concept for a lot of people. You spend a long time accumulating assets and thinking about that, and then your entire mind shifts to this distribution phase. And so I think it's the most popular need that most retirees or near retirees have. So I'm not surprised by the large group. But I did choose a certain pathway to talk about it, and when we get to the Q&A section, we'll have a chance to kind of deviate off my path and move towards your path. The very first question that I think is there are really two questions, I think, with people who have taken the time to come to this talk. You want to know how much you can spend out of your nest egg and be safe. And when I say safe, I guess what I'm really saying is you want to know how much you can spend without running out of money before you run out of breath. And the running out of breath part is usually not under your control, so you want to make sure that you're spending money in a prudent fashion. So that's kind of question number one, and I hope to be able to answer this question for you in a way that teaches you how to fish as opposed to just giving you a fish. I will give you a fish at the end, but I want to sort of teach you how to think about it within the context of your life. I also will say that I'm looking at a large group of people here. Each one of you has a unique life, but also a unique financial life. Everybody has a different balance sheet. You all have different asset mixes in your life. You all have different needs, and you all have different budgets. So when I talk about these principles, I hope they apply to you in some way or another. Giving you a specific answer about how much you can spend is an impossible task without knowing you. But I can give you the principles to help think it through. The second question is sort of a subset question of the first one. It's not just how much, but it's from where do I pull this money to live, and why I pull it from one source or another, and what the implications really are. So those are the two big burning questions of this talk, and my hope is to lead you down this path to help be able to think it through effectively. So I gave you a little hint. I love pictures, and this picture shows that there really aren't any rules. The theme here is that there are no rules of thumb. And I wrote the article in the Record Eagle about this topic, and what I actually said was there are no rules. This idea of a rule of thumb is that it's not accurate. It's a complex setup, and let me kind of go through a few of these pictures with you to show you what I mean. Get used to seeing that big yellow box with the bar chart. That represents your portfolio of assets, your investments. It may be your IRA, your 403b, your 401k. It might be a Roth IRA. It might be a joint account or a trust account. It's all of that stuff. It's your portfolio. But you have more than that in your life that affects your financial setup. You've got a home that has equity in it. You've got potentially insurance policies or annuities up there in the upper part of the screen. You possibly have pension income coming in from an employer that actually had a pension back in the day. I kind of chuckle because it's a lovely thing that increasingly doesn't exist for the younger generation. So you have Social Security income. You have potentially a business that actually generates income for you. You may have rental houses or rental properties, commercial properties that generate income for you. You may actually have gifting that you've been fortunate enough to receive from heirs along the way, inheritances that either have happened or will happen with some high level of certainty. So you've got also a question, and the other big circle here is this concept of time. You know, not every one of you has the same time frame of your retirement defined. I mean, I may be looking at people here who say, well, I want to retire at 55, and they're looking at a potential, if they're a joint couple, we're talking about a possibly 40-year retirement. You know, that's how long it could last. I might be looking at people here who are 75 years old and just deciding to retire, and they're looking at a situation where it might be a 15-year retirement. So time is a really, really important factor in this whole thing. The consideration of how much is totally dependent on how long. And then there's this last picture that I have on here, which is a target with the arrow in the middle, which is basically your objectives and your goals for your money. So, you know, an example of the different goals that some people have that may differ across this whole audience is that some people are saying, well, I really want to leave what I have in my portfolio and my other assets. I want to leave that much plus a little bit more to offset inflation over the years to my kids. Like, that's important to me to leave this residual for my heirs. Other people are saying, no, actually, all I really care about is maximizing what I can spend in my retirement comfortably and enjoy my retirement years because I built this wealth and I really don't owe anything to my kids beyond loving them and educating them and supporting them in emotional ways. But financially, that isn't my goal. And there is no judgment on that. I have clients who run the gamut. They're on both ends of the spectrum. So all of these things are part of what I would describe as your total wealth, your total financial picture. So when we talk about how much, it's funny, if I get that question, I was talking to Gene in my office today about this talk, you know, if I get that question from somebody just out of left field, how much can I spend in retirement? Literally, I have no answer for people. We need to sit down and talk about everything before I could ever answer that very simple question. I am going to give you an answer, but it's going to be an answer that's based on this idea of complexity. Let's talk about this changing landscape. I like to bring sort of a big picture into talks. This is, and the source, it doesn't really matter. I cut off the source on the whole thing to make the slide look pretty, but what I will tell you is if you go back to the mid-90s and you asked a bunch of non-retirees, when do you plan to retire? You can see a trend. Looking forward now 20 years to 2017, those who said, well, I want to retire when I'm under 65 years old, went from a pretty big group of people. This was right, 96 was right during a bull market, the late phases of the biggest bull market in market history, and I'll be showing you a picture of that. So it's not that surprising that people are like, well, I want to retire like right away. That's been a perpetual downturn, a downtrend, while those who are saying, I want to work past 65 years old, has gone from a pretty small number up to almost 40% of survey participants are saying, well, I'm going to work until I'm over 65. So this is the trend, that people are working longer. And I will say that there's a combination of reasons. One is, remember after 1996, there have been two major downturns in the stock market. That sets people back. But I think there's a cultural thing as well. People are healthier. People are they're actively engaged in their work potentially, and there's meaning in work. And so I will tell you, when I sit down with prospective clients thinking about retirement, one of the things that I do talk to people about is working is good. Working keeps you healthy. It keeps you actively engaged in your community. It does a wonderful thing for the math of retirement planning. It shrinks the number of years that your money has to last. Simply because you're earning it based on your labor, your investments can grow further for longer, you can save for longer, and then you can spend it over a shorter period of time, which means you can spend more. So the longer you work, in my opinion, as a general statement, the better. If it's terrible work that is breaking your back, breaking your mind, destroying your marriage, making you feel, that you're doing something that's not filling you up emotionally, well, there's all that stuff that you have to weigh. But, I'm 45 and I'm talking to a group of people who've lived longer than me. You know what I'm talking about. So there's a kind of a general trend of working longer. And this is the other element that I want to make sure people understand, and this is from the Society of Actuaries, so it is legitimate, that for a healthy couple, and I'll talk a lot about scenarios at times when I talk, and I do tend to talk about couples, and I've had a participant say, you should talk about single people once in a while too. This chart is about couples, so forgive me. A healthy couple at age 65 years old, as a generic healthy couple, they have a 50% chance of living into their low 90s, one of the two. Well, when you're developing an overall financial construct of your life to supply income, to sustain a lifestyle for your household, well, one of the two of you may live well into the early 90s, for example, and that is a long, long retirement. So it has this. It's one of the reasons that I have a conservative, personally as a professional, a conservative overlay as to how much you should spend out of your investment portfolio. Because length, you have to plan for that. The irony of it is it's planning for the worst case scenario that you live a long time. I'm a former actuary, so I'm a little bit morbid about mortality. To me, living a long time in my world is a big liability. Because you got to plan for meeting the liability. So, it's great to live a long time, but it's not great to live a long time and not have any money. So this is an important thing to think about when you develop your spending plan and what you think you need in your life. Recognize that it could be a longer retirement than what you're projecting. This slide is to also set the table for some concepts here. This icon of the portfolio versus your budget. This is one of the reasons that when I say you can't really give an audience an answer, it's because everybody is different. Well, this is one way in which people are very different. If you look at these three pie charts, and the representation here is the sources of income for these three different households. If you look on the left, we're dealing with a household where their portfolio, the income that needs to come from their portfolio, the draws off of their portfolio, those distributions off their portfolio, represent a significant chunk of the overall pie. Social Security is a smaller piece of it. So this is an example of someone who doesn't have a pension, doesn't have any rental properties, doesn't have a small business that they're passively owning and getting some passive income from. They're living off of two main things, and the portfolio represents a big chunk of their total budget. I will tell you, budgeting as pre-retirees and as retirees, budgeting is very important. Going into it, you should know before you make the decision, what is it that I actually spend my money on? What do I spend my money on that I won't spend my money on when I'm in retirement because I'm no longer working and I'm going to become more conservative? Reevaluating your priorities of really what it is that matters to you. You might travel more. You travel more in the early years, a little less than the later years. You may have done things while you're working to sort of fill yourselves up emotionally, going to plays and concerts and doing other things that you may say, you know what, now I've got more time and I can fill myself up in ways that don't cost as much money. So there's a reprioritization that happens within the budgeting. And budgeting, you cannot make a decision without having that map of what you need. You'd be well, you may not be very surprised. You may be one of these people that you don't have a budget, really. You have income. You've always felt okay. You've never really thought about what you spend. Well, the moment that you stop working and stop getting a paycheck, all of a sudden you start wondering, what do I spend my money on, and do I have enough of it now to continue that lifestyle? So budgeting's key. So this person on the left, the portfolio is a massive, important part, and it's in the amount you can draw off of it, that how much question is really important. Go to the one in the middle, all of a sudden I've said, well, the portfolio is lesser. There's more now coming from rental income. Happens to be that I own 2 or 3 rentals, let's say. that's generating income. And I have Social Security as well, and I worked for a long time, and I generated, a pretty good history of Social Security work. And so my Social Security actually represents a pretty big chunk of my needs. Within all of this, there's the choice of this person over here might have a life that's very expensive, and this person in the middle might have a life that's way more modest. Third person might actually now layer in a pension. So the pension provides some ballast in the overall budget. And all of a sudden you see the shrinking need for the portfolio's draws. Might be a third of the portfolio or 25% of the 25% of the budget is represented by what the portfolio can generate. So what I'll say is, imagine the person on the left having a situation where the portfolio declines to a significant degree, or they spend at a rate that is too much, too burdensome for the portfolio, and over the course of time, they deplete their portfolio. Well, what's left behind is a massive hole. If it's 80% of their life is generated by their money and they spend all their money down, the how much question, getting that wrong, is catastrophic. Person all the way on the right has a much more diversified portfolio, may even be a smaller budget overall. Their complete depletion of their portfolio through spending too much isn't going to break them. I have examples of clients who are in this exact kind of dichotomy. And I can tell you there's someone in my mind where I always say, you're never going to live under a bridge. You might spend your money at too rapid a clip, but I'm not that worried at the end of the day. If you don't have a lot left over, or if you spend it too quickly, I know you're going to be okay. Because you have sources of income that are solid and will always generate enough for you to be able to have a home that you own outright and income that is better than the vast majority of people that you cross on the street. So that's because that person has a different construct than other people, where almost all of their money that they have coming into their life comes from their portfolio. So the draw off that portfolio is critical to get right. So this is something that I think is a framework that you need to have in your mind when you're sitting down thinking about your life. Okay, so I'm going to highlight a risk that I don't think I don't think most people think about, and it may come as a surprise to you, it might not, but we're going to go into it. But I first want to talk a bit about, now that we've gotten to this point where we recognize that we're talking about the portfolio in the how much question. We're not talking about all the other things that define how much that portfolio is, what the importance of it is to you. We're now going to focus simply on how much from that portfolio can I spend. This behavioral chart is something that you need to be cognizant of throughout your retirement life. You during the accumulation phase of your wealth, saving money, putting it in the 401k, investing the money, you had some of this to deal with, no question. Oftentimes, when you were younger and the market went down, and to be totally honest with you, some of you may have been doing most of your accumulation during a bull market that just never seemed to go down ever, from 1983 to year 2000. So it was like what's risk? Risk doesn't exist. Others have seen what that risk can look like. But when you're young, you can live through anything. There's a song, I don't know the title of it, it's sort of like Young, Dumb, and Stupid. It's a hot new song. I've got a 17-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old daughter, and it's something about being young, dumb, and stupid. Well, young, dumb, and stupid allows you during a bear market to go, well, whatever. What am I going to do about it? It's down, and I'm putting more money away, and I've got time. I'm not retiring for a while, so who cares? And even if you did care, you wouldn't know what to do anyway. And so you're not young, dumb, and stupid anymore. You're the opposite of those things. So this situation, so that's old, smart, I don't know. So this roller coaster of emotion is something you need to guard against, and you're going to guard against it through what I would describe are institutional ways of thinking about things, like in a formalized sense. And so this idea of I'm super optimistic, the market's going up, I'm elated, I'm feeling great, my portfolio has grown, I have too much of a weighting in stocks, but stocks are doing wonderfully. So what can go wrong? Oh, well, things do go wrong. We have recessions, these contractions happen, bear markets happen, the market starts to fall. I'm not teaching anything you don't already know because you've lived through them. Down they go, and you start to, first off, you deny that it's happening. Well, of course, it's going to come back up again. And then you start getting confused, and you're worried about your portfolio, and it continues to go down. And then finally, you reach this capitulation stage, this complete despair, where you're realizing, oh my God, I've lost a lot of money, and I can't believe I didn't sell when it was up, and now I don't know what to do. And of course, you go and talk to people. You talk to your advisor. You sit around your own kitchen table if you're managing yourself, and you recognize I need to make some changes. I can't handle another dollar of loss. If this continues, I'm in really big trouble. Maybe my lifestyle is going to be changed. Again, that gets back to those pie charts. If your portfolio is a big part of your income source, you're going to freak out a lot faster. If it's smaller, you might be able to handle it. So you get to the end, you make portfolio changes right at the bottom, of course. We all know that. And then the market starts to recover, and you are completely stuck in a conservative mode. You've lost the money. And then you don't really know what to do at that point. You figure it out eventually that maybe I need to start taking some risk again. But this is the classic cycle that leaves you kind of worse off because you didn't go into it with a game plan. You didn't have a behavioral game plan. You didn't have the proper risk profile defined for you. And that's the job of an advisor. It's also your own job. Know yourself. It's your money. Your advisor is only going to listen to what you're saying. When you walk in the office and you're completely bullish, you're talking about the expansion, you're talking about the tax cuts, you're talking about corporations having record profits, you're talking about the sky's the limit and artificial intelligence and robotics and, oh my gosh, the amount of medical breakthroughs that we're going to have. I am so beyond bullish. Well, you know what your advisor is going to do when they hear that? They're going to be like, yeah, okay, great. So if I'm managing your money, it sounds like you really want me to be a bit more aggressive than I maybe would otherwise be, but I really want you as a client, and I want to keep you as a client. Every good advisor goes through that exact same tug of war with prospective clients and existing clients. Having a risk profile defined is pretty critical at the front end, and sticking to it because it's defined by something real. Having an advisor who has the ability, I think, to push back on that emotional tug of war that's created by clients is pretty important too. Being a bit more conservative as an advisor is something that I think that people should be because, it's prudent. So risk profiling is made up of a few things. You have to take risk to make money. I can tell you if you're not taking any risk, you're just not going to make much money at all. And I mean that over the long haul. There's a perfectly valid time to not have risk in your portfolio, but it can't be a permanent position. If you are permanently risk-free, you will permanently not make much money. So being proactive in risk management and worrying about taking risks that you're not being paid properly for, assessing that in an analytical way, great. Doing it as just sort of a way of life, well, you're not going to make much money on your money. Well, what does that mean? It means you need to save more, you need to spend less, and that's the other triggers, the other levers that get the job done. You don't have to take risks. There's nobody putting a gun to your head and saying you have to take risk. You can solve the equation by just spending less, working more. Those are all the options. But you should take some risk over the course of the multiple cycles of the market over your whole retirement life. There's a time to take risk, there's a time to not take risk. But risk is required. You have a capacity for taking risk based on that whole picture of your wealth. That is kind of like the science end of it. Like I could sit there and talk to you as your advisor and say, well, yeah, I mean, you've got your portfolio, the draws you have from it are only needed to cover 20% of your overall life, and you've got all these other assets and all these other income sources meeting, 80% of your income. You've got the capacity to take risk with your portfolio that someone else might not have. So coming back to that budget versus the income sources. But there's another part of you which is not the science part. It's not Spock, it's Captain Kirk. And that's your risk tolerance. That's the emotional part of you. That's the part that I can tell you as a professional, I err towards learning more about that side than I do about the risk capacity side. Because I know that through this roller coaster, your emotional part of you is going to take over. And if you put yourself in a position where the emotional piece is so powerful, you will make pretty major mistakes through cycles. You might get lucky and have a 1983 to 2000 kind of experience where it didn't really matter, but you might get unlucky and actually have 50% downdrafts in the market, which has happened over the last 20 years 2 times. You have to be prepared for what you're going to do, and risk profiling is the key to that puzzle. And it's science and it's art. And it's knowing yourself. So this gives you that history that I was alluding to. Bull markets happen. They last for quite a long time sometimes. This is going back all the way to 1930 up to very recent. So we're talking about 10 to 15-year kind of expansions can happen where there's a bull market. I will point out that if you look at those big blue sections of market returns, there are periods where things go down. They just didn't go down at a time when there was a recession. They didn't go down in a significant fashion, except for the one mistake on this chart, which was back in 1937. There's a massive decline during a recession, and it was a very, very large 30% decline over a short period, right after the Great Depression. It was that echo crash. They didn't seem to want to call that a downturn, but it existed. I wasn't alive during that time, so I've just read about it. But you can see in the last 20 years, well, there's 2 periods I want to focus on, 1980 to 2000. You can see it's almost all blue and very little bad stuff happened. That 3-month decline there of 30% was the 1987 crash. Didn't last very long. So it's a whole generation of people, a whole history, a whole mindset that I started in the business in 1999 after being an actuary for a while, and that was the construct of most people that I talked to as an advisor, which was that the markets were just a wealth-creating machine like none other. It was the greatest bull market in history. Right after that, the market fell about 50%. Tech bubble crashed, burst, and stocks were crazily overpriced, not just tech stocks, many stocks, and there's a huge decline, a massive correction. If you notice, these big declines, these bear markets, they don't last forever. They don't even last for that long. They last a couple years at most from the beginning of their decline to the end, sometimes much shorter than that. But the severity isn't really being shown here. 50% declines is a pretty massive hole to dig out of. Over the course of time, the stock market has created wealth. There's no denying that. You hit it at the wrong time, it can be devastating. If you get your risk profile wrong, you can make it doubly devastating. So the most recent one was, we all know, the 2008 crash from 07 to 09. The market went down, and it went down over 50%. And then since then, we've been on a pretty, I've been highly skeptical of it, very much so, so that's full disclosure. I will say that it's been now a pretty long expansion. It's now 9 years long, 9 years old. That isn't the longest period of a bull market in history, but it is not that far off from recent bull market lengths. So this whole chart is to try to give you some sense of the timing of today within the risk profile that you need to define in your life. So I'm not projecting a humongous decline tomorrow. I am saying cycles exist. They've existed pretty routinely throughout history. The market level where it is today requires you to really do a double take and a triple take on what kind of risk you have in your portfolio. Risk capacity, risk tolerance. Okay. This leads me to the big risk that I want to highlight for you within your overall how much question. And the how much question is also, in what way do I take it? What's my mentality of withdrawals? Withdrawing money robotically and saying, I'm going to take out 5% of my money every year, and I'm going to set that number in stone, and then I'm going to increase it with inflation every single year. And I'm going to do that because I deserve a raise. And life costs more the next year, and I'm not going to change what I have designed in my life. My pie chart is my pie chart, and it's going to continue to grow at 1.5% per year, and I don't care what happens. This is the kind of rigidity that you can't have, in my view. Now, go back to those pie charts. If 80% of your life is funded by your portfolio, that means 80% of your budget is dependent on how the portfolio does, and you set up a very flexible withdrawal strategy, which is, well, if the market goes down, I'm just going to cut my spending by, I don't know, a third. So I'll just let it recover by not pulling out as much. Well, you can't really do that if your life is defined by mostly what you pull out of your portfolio, unless you don't really have any real needs. Like, if your whole life is like DirecTV, Netflix, and pizza, you could say, well, I don't really need Netflix, and I don't really need DirecTV. But the reality is you're going to have other things in your life that are much more important, like utilities, property taxes, gas, insurance, things you can't really cut. So it matters how much your portfolio is driving your budget. So this story, I'm going to kind of lay it out for you to show you the effect of something that I don't know if a lot of people are aware of. It's called the sequence of returns risk. And what it's basically saying, let's talk about the left side of this. Someone has a nest egg, and they're going to have 4 years of returns. 27% return in the first year, fantastic year. Then they're going to make 9, then they're going to make 7, and then they're going to lose 15%. That's the story. And they're going to take that same 4 years, and they're going to replicate it every 4 years, all the way through their retirement. So imagine it's deja vu all over again, 4 years at a time, repeated. They have $1 million to start, and they're pulling out $50,000 that first year. And then they're saying, I'm not going to change. I'm just going to do $50,000 plus inflation every single year. So they've created a very rigid plan. This individual, see, I did it again. This couple or individual has $1 million to start. You can see the chart goes up above $1 million because they made 27%, and they only spent $50,000. Then it drops every 4 years. It drops, but they're doing all right. And then finally, as time goes on, this catches up to them because that $50,000, remember, is growing and growing and growing and growing. And when you're talking 20 years later, it's not $50,000 anymore. It's gone up. Starts to deplete, and they finally run out. They have the total depletion of their portfolio about 36 years into it. So that's a pretty good setup. It's not even that realistic, frankly, but it's a pretty good outcome. 35 years the money lasted. I mean, they're not going to spend more and more and more and more and more and more money in that rigid way. Things late in life, you stop spending money on certain things, and you spend money on other things, and things change. But that's the story of this sequence of returns. Up, 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 then down. That's about a 6% average return for a 4-year period. Flip it over to here. It's exactly in the opposite direction. Instead of making money the first year, you lost the 15%. Then you made the 7, then you made the 9, then you made the 27. Take those same 4 years, replicate it every 4 years, deja vu all over again, same exact spending. You can see the first big drop happens, little bit of recovery, little big gain, big drop happens again, and pretty soon the portfolio depletes, and it lasts about 23 years. It's 13 years shorter, exactly the same spending. The only thing we did is we said you're going to lose money the first year, and you're going to make a little bit of money the next 2, and then you're going to make your big year in the 4th year. And then we're going to repeat it. That is exactly the same 6% return. There's no difference. It's just simply the sequence of returns. The story of this is that the early parts, the early years, the early decade of your retirement, you need to make sure that you don't go through massive downturns. Second lesson. That means know the market generally where it's at. Make sure your risk profile is correct. Make sure you have an advisor in your life that understands markets, understands risk, understands being conservative when you need to be conservative, understands how to manage that risk. I mean, these are important things, but the most important part of that is getting your overall asset allocation done properly, because you have the risk profile done properly. You cannot have an elated, overly bullish, overly optimistic viewpoint in the early part of your retirement at the market peak. It will be a situation where you will have to do what? The second lesson, you can't be rigid in your spending. You can't be robotic. You have to have adjustments. You have to reevaluate your budget based on the reality of your life, the reality of your portfolio. It's funny, I know I'm lecturing because that's what I actually am doing, but it feels like I'm lecturing. But the reality is that's what you have to, how you have to think it through. Sequence of returns. So, risk profile, making sure that you have your asset allocation done in a strategic fashion that actually takes into consideration risk. Rebalancing that portfolio, never letting your emotions get away from you. Don't let elation and desperation affect how your portfolio ultimately is going to look. Have a plan. Be proactive. Be flexible in your spending. Make sure you have a budget that identifies the hard expenses that are not going to go away relative to, and that's prioritization. Then the discretionary parts that you actually do flex and flow with based on what's going on with your money. So defining that discretion and non-discretion element of your budget is pretty important. Having a budget, first and foremost, is the most important part. If you're going through your retirement completely clueless, you either have so much money that you don't have to worry about it. That's great. I don't even want you to think about a budget. Or you're really walking down a dark path and you don't know where it's going. And don't expect your advisor to be so paternalistic that you can be completely blind and you're depending on your advisor to tell you what to do. I have experiences with this where people ask for permission to do something with their money, and they're expecting their advisor to answer the question of whether they can or can't do it. I mean, that's great. You're paying the advisor for advice, but this is a combination teamwork thing here. It can't be someone saying yes or no when you may actually already know the answer. So rebalancing, strategic asset allocation, making sure you have a semblance of a plan, sticking to it, and having the proper risk profiling. Pretty basic blocking and tackling. Okay, so I'm getting to the end of this section, and what I am going to say to you is how much should I spend? I have a nice icon there. This is the prescription mode. I'm going to give you the fish. And the fish is this. There's a old study that was done and a million other studies on what's called the sustainable withdrawal rate. It's the big buzzword in the industry. And there was a guy who did a study probably 25, 30 years ago, and he came up with the 4% rule, and I think it stuck so well in the minds of advisors that there's this idea of the 4% rule. You can spend 4% of your portfolio every year, and the money will last. And it's back-tested. We looked at all the different historical returns of everything under the sun, and there's not one example where that messed up. You know, you didn't run out of money. And then lots of studies around that concept, and some people say more, some people say less. My comfort zone for most people is 3 to 4% per year. And so I would err more towards 3, but I also live in a realistic world where people need more. So I have clients who need to draw more money than 3. I say need with quotes around it because we all need what we need, but we want what we want, and we don't know which one it is. It's mixed up. Markets are high, in my professional opinion, after a 9-year bull market, based on what multiple ways of valuing the stock market, it's high. That means that you're paying a high price for an investment, which the corollary of that is that the rule is you will make less money on stocks going forward, or you'll have higher volatility and need to sustain losses before it recovers again. In other words, it's not a low return in a steady Eddie way. It's a low return from point to point with lots of volatility in between. And if you don't get your behavior right, you're going to sell at the bottom. So I think it's a bad setup right now for a heavy, heavy, heavy stock portfolio. The problem with it is bonds aren't great either. There's your counterpoint, bonds. Interest rates are low. They've been low for a long time. Interest rates may be rising. They've risen recently, but they're rising from very low levels. Bonds are not I'm not pounding the table for bonds, but they are the natural ballast in your portfolio, and they provide some steadiness to it. You mix two things that aren't that great. That means your portfolio over the next 5 to 10 years is going to sustain some volatility, in my view, to the downside, because things have to right themselves. We need cheaper prices. Secondly, you're going to have volatility to the downside, and the overall return from one day shutting your eyes to opening your eyes 5 to 10 years from now, the return is likely to be lower than what you wanted to see. Which means that if you're going to try to figure out how much should I spend, you need to take that all into consideration. So err towards 3, not towards 4. Okay, there's the fish. But I didn't say anything about any of the complexities up in the upper right section of all the other components of your life. I don't know if this portfolio it fills the need of a small sliver of your overall income or all of your income. I didn't ask how old you were. I didn't ask you what you're going to do with the leftover money when you're dead, and does it really matter if it's all gone, or do I really want to leave it to my kids? I didn't ask you anything. What I gave you was the answer that I think people who come to a talk like this want to hear. They want a number, and the number is 3 to 4%. You'll find advisors that say more, and you'll find advisors that may say a little bit less than 3. Most don't have the guts to say less than 3. Because it's pretty bad. You walk into an office and you say, I've got $850,000 and I need a certain amount of money each year, and I don't know how much I should spend, and I'm afraid I'll run out of money. And you say, well, you should take out 1.5% of that, so about $12,000 a year is what you can afford to take out of it. And then you say, well, what do you get from Social Security? And they say, well, $1,500 a month, so $18,000. So you just told me I have to cut my budget in half? So then they usually leave. They're not your client. So most advisors don't have the guts to say it should be lower. 3% is that magic number for me right now. I know that the current setup in the markets will not be permanent. Things are going to change. That's the way markets work. They're going to adjust. If returns are likely to look low from this point to that point, at some point the world will readjust and say, no. We're just going to take all of that overvaluation and we're going to bring it down to where it should be so that the people who are investing here can make a reasonable return to get to that end point. So it means big volatility and then the returns. If you can sustain the big volatility by having a conservative portfolio, it's the quintessential market timing speech. Very difficult, believe me. Boy, I sound like him again, don't I? Believe me. You got to sustain that downturn. And that's tough to do. It's very tough to do, but it's important to know where you are starting out your retirement. Getting back to the sequence of return risk, you don't want those first years to be the worst years. You'd much rather have those losses come when you're 83 years old or 85 years old or 88 years old. You're likely not to, because you're likely to be conservative at that point and well-seasoned in your retirement. But those early years are critical. They spiral the whole picture down if you lose a bunch of money. So I feel sorry for people who retired in 2006, 2007. People who retired in 1998, 1999. They did not have this in their mind. So then they lose a bunch of money and they don't know what to do, and it's permanently, unless they had the steel spines to stick it out and ride the recovery back again and recover it all, they were permanently damaged. And it was very, very difficult for an advisor to say, oh, you know what, long haul, just hang in there. I know you're down about 40%, you just retired. It's going to be okay. It's all going to come back again. This is, remember, you're talking to the same person who lost the 40% in your portfolio. Do you think you have any credibility at that point? None. They just say, cash me out. Well, that's really the dumbest thing you can possibly do. It's like, well, I'm not listening to you anymore. But you need to ride it out. Well, those who are ignorant, the old saying of ignorance is bliss, those who are totally ignorant, focused on their life, focused on their work. They were maybe still working last few years of their retirement. They held out, extended their work life a little bit longer and said, oh, you know, we're gonna be okay. I've got the income to do it, and we can let this. Those people worked out just fine now, didn't it? So you got to make sure you're going in with a game plan. Okay, 3%. That's where I want you to focus. Now, from where? From where? This is the second question. I'm focusing a little bit less on this question, but it's an important second question of this whole talk. So the prescription here is a little more nebulous. I'm not going to give you the fish, because there really isn't the fish to give. I want you to recognize that there's a balancing act between three different pots of money in your portfolio. And I'm focusing again on the portfolio and drawing from it. There's one part that is like liquid available money, money that's already been taxed. So you made money, you saved it, you put it into, these are the kinds of accounts that have this. And I know I'm talking beneath many of you, so I apologize. Individual brokerage account. It's in your name. A joint account. A trust account. Okay? These are pots of money that you can pull money from, and you don't owe the government any money necessarily. You only owe money to the government for taxes if you sell something that had gone up from when you bought it. All the income that had been coming off of it and you've been reinvesting, well, you already paid tax on that. So it's really mostly available for you, and especially because you can say, you know what, I just want to sell off some of those bond funds so I can buy a car. So the bond funds don't go up. They just mostly kick off income. You pay tax on it, and you don't have a big gain in those. So you pull the money out of the bond fund, you buy the car. The government doesn't see it on a tax return that somehow you pulled money out of your individual account or your joint account and you owe taxes. So it's liquid available money. It's great to have for those examples of, I need to buy a car, I need to re-roof the house, I need to paint the house, we're going to go on a vacation, we're going to gift money to our favorite charity, or our kid needs a loan. These are all things that come up that are bigger, they're unexpected kind of, and you're like, well, you know, I need to get access to this money. That's a great spot, great thing to have. So preserving it to an extent within the construct of your overall financial life, not depleting it completely, and having, and so the tug of war is this. Well, I can pull all my money out of my after-tax money, all those in that individual account or joint account, and I can drain it all down, and the government's not getting anything. This is fantastic. What a great plan. Well, 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, you're like, I don't have any money in the bank that I could use to buy a car or give a loan to my kid or re-roof the house. So now I'm like completely at the mercy of my IRA. And that money's never been taxed. And all of a sudden now the big thing happens and I'm like, I have to take money out of that. Plus all my living expenses, I've got to take a big chunk of it out of my IRA. And oh my gosh, I just pushed myself up into a higher tax bracket because all of that's taxable income. So you want to have a balanced attack here. It's important, to have liquid money. It's great to be able to pull some of that off, and there are tax tricks, and I'm going to talk about them before we're done, that the liquid money allows for you to have, but balance it out. I put a little star next to a Roth IRA because if I have to tell you from where last, I would say the Roth IRA is probably the last place you want to just take money for those expenses. Why? Because it's money that's already been taxed, and you put it into the Roth, and then it's growing without any tax to pay on any of the gains, even if you sell something at a gain and reinvest it, even if you have the interest coming in or dividends coming in, the government never taxes that either. And then when you decide to pull the money out, you or your heirs, keep this in mind, or your heirs, you're dead and this Roth IRA goes to your heirs, that money never gets taxed either. So this is like, when I say tax-deferred accounts like an IRA, this is literally like a tax-free pot of money. You already paid the tax and it went in, and now it's growing like mad. So it's kind of like this honey pot for your heirs. If you actually do have an intention of giving money away, the best money to give away would be a Roth IRA. I had a client very early in my business who died very, very quickly, so he was not a long-term client, and he converted. We're going to get into this. He took all of his IRA, his regular IRA that he hadn't yet paid tax on, and to avoid the estate tax, back then the estate tax was lower, his accountant, very, very proactive, very thoughtful, just said, you know what, before you die, you should convert all of your IRA. Bring your wealth down, not have to pay as much of an estate tax, and your kids are going to get a Roth IRA that's going to last them. It's going to provide them income free of tax for the rest of their lives. And to this day, it's followed through, and it's now been 15 years. Those to keep you awake. Okay, so balancing act, and that's the from where question. And I can tell you the specifics of a plan for you has to take into consideration all of the complexity of your life. There is no way to give you an answer. Well, yeah, the best place to take it is your IRA first, then your Roth IRA, and then your joint account. No one's ever going to be able to say that. You have to have it within the overall context of your financial life. Okay, I'm going to close with some tax things because I almost always do. I don't know if I told you this. I should have. The last two Money Series programs are going to be on the same topic, two different venues. I am going to be talking about the new tax plan at the Senior Center in a week. It's at like 3:30 in the afternoon at the Senior Center on a Wednesday. And it's in the paper, so if you look at there's a little ad the Senior Center put out. And I'm going to do a repeat in Leland on the same exact topic. So taxes are important. They're a hot topic today. Things have changed. So let's go through a few things that you might want to keep in mind with the concept of from where. Because when I said there are some tricks that you can employ by spending for a while from one pot, the stuff that's already been taxed that you don't have to pay tax on while you're living off of it, it can create a situation where you have a very low income on paper. You might be very wealthy, but boy, have you made your income low by taking cash or bond money. You're not creating a bunch of taxable income. You're not living off of Social Security yet. You're delaying. So now you look poor, basically, but you have lots of money. What you can do, first off, is if you have a situation in your life, and bullet point number 1, where you actually have gains built up in some investment. It can be various things. But you bought something low, and now it's really high. If you have a situation where your income is low enough, and your income is actually below the cap for the 12% tax bracket, that used to be the 15%, now it's the 12%. So for a couple, taxable income, $80,000 or lower. Single couple, a single person, $40,000 or lower. So if all of your sources of income don't add up to be $80,000, and there's room there, let's say it's $50,000, $60,000, because you're keeping your income really low. If you fill up the rest of the space inside that 12% tax bracket with capital gains, long-term capital gains, there's no tax to pay at the federal level. It's a special 0% rate on capital gains as long as your income is in that 12% bracket. So it's strategic, it's smart you might have a year or two in your early part of your retirement. You go, I've got enough liquid money. I might just pull off some cash or some bond money, keep my income super low, don't take Social Security, let it defer, and I can take those gains strategically along the way, and I can pay no tax on all those gains that I thought I had to pay gains on. Fantastic plan. It's part of the from where question. Okay? Number two, same exact concept, same exact idea. I love the capital gains at zero. But you can do strategic Roth conversions. So you're taking your IRA money, never been taxed before, and you're purposely saying, no, you know what? I'm going to take that money, I'm going to convert, I'm going to take it out, and I'm going to put it into my Roth. I'm going to take it out, and I'm going to call it income, and I'm going to purposefully pay the government taxes, but I'm going to do it at such a low tax rate, and I'm going to put it into the Roth and never have to pay tax ever again. You only do it in the magnitude that doesn't push you up into a too high of a tax bracket. So again, it's strategically saying, I'm in a lower income situation right now on purpose. I get to convert my IRA at a very low tax rate because later on in life, I have to take money out of my IRA. I have required distributions. And I might be in a higher bracket in the future. I might think tax rates are going to go up in the future. So, boy, I can do it now at a low tax rate. Let me do that. Again, the from where is, how do you get your income low enough? Well, you might take it out of just cash savings for a little while. Save some money on taxes by doing Roth conversions. Last thing, and I'll touch on it very quickly and wrap it up. The last thing is this idea, the world has changed for itemized deductions. Right now, you are allowed to get a deduction for a donation to a charity. But it's only going to matter if your overall deductions don't add up to the standard deduction. The standard deduction is doubled. So the new tax law says that you get up to up to $24,000, and if you're even older, a little bit more than that. $24,000 is a standard deduction. So if you have property taxes and donations that add up to, and those are the big categories now, property taxes up to a certain amount, state income taxes up to a certain amount are deductible, $10,000 only. So if you had big taxes that were $15,000, $20,000, now it's only $10,000 is deductible. Donations, the other big category. You add them up, and it doesn't equal $24,000. Then it doesn't matter that you gave a $100 donation to your church or to Goodwill or whatever it is that it's not deductible because you already were going to get a standard deduction. Okay, so the way to get a deduction, if you're not in that itemized deduction world now because of the standard deduction, is you can actually, after the age of 70 and a half, and this is going to happen more and more with people, you can actually take part of your IRA's required distribution. So think of it this way. You have to take money out. The government wants its taxes. It's required every single year after 70 and a half. That's just reality. But if you're going to also take that money and put it in the bank, and then later on in the year you decide I'm going to donate some money, and you're not going to get a deduction, the way to have gotten the deduction was to take money from your IRA and directly give it to charity. Satisfy your required distribution by donating directly to your charity. That is deductible. Why? Because now it doesn't show up as income on your tax return. You've been able to take that income off of your tax return and give it to charity. So you're getting a deduction that you otherwise wouldn't get. So direct charitable IRA donations, they're called qualified charitable distributions, are going to become all the rage going forward for a lot of people. So be aware of the fact that this is a way after the age of 70 and a half, and a lot of you are not there. Once you get to that point and you have required distributions, the way to do it is to get deductions as a qualified charitable distribution. So that wraps up the program. I also want to thank, of course, the Senior Center and Tattle, Traverse Area District Library, and Leland Township Library, and Up North TV. And